So step two of the journey is, okay, how do you now start to scale that engine? Because so many startups, I think, they get some early traction and then they really struggle with that scaling aspect. And there's lots and lots of things that, are difficult about that.
Welcome back to the B2B Playbook, where we believe that great go-to-market is about people, not platforms. That belief isn't just a philosophy, it's the foundation of your revenue engine. But most teams, they skip the architecture and they jump straight into the tactics. They chase pipeline without asking, how will this actually scale? And I'm very excited because in this episode, we've got Perrett, the CEO of Firmable, and he joins us with Adem Manderovic, the founder of Closed Circuit Selling and CRO School, to break down what a real revenue engine looks like. Together, we're going to unpack how to build a 10-line economic model that actually drives go-to-market decisions, how to work backwards from revenue goals to align sales and marketing efforts, and how to replace brute force outbound with brand, referenceability, and compounding demand. We're also going to talk to things like expanding into new markets. Paul has an enormous amount of experience, and I cannot wait to dive into it. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. So great to have you here.
No, that's awesome. No, thanks, George. I'm really thrilled to be here. This is a topic that I'm pretty passionate about. So yeah, I'm super keen to kind of dive into it.
Fantastic. And Adem, thank you again, as always, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
With that intro, I can only imagine where this show is going to go.
All right, Paul, I want to kick it to you just to begin. For our Aussie listeners, our Australian listeners, hopefully they've heard of Firmable and they know what it does. But just in case they've forgotten or haven't come across it, or our international listeners aren't sure, could you please let us know what Firmable is? Give us a little quick overview of it and really what your role is there.
Yeah, sure. So Firmable in some ways comes out of, I guess, a passion that I have for kind of go-to-market and really helping organizations kind of drive kind of best practice go-to-market. I've been in B2B selling for probably far too long, B2B for a long time, B2B tech for a long time. And one of the, I guess, kind of convictions that I had over the journey was how important utilizing kind of external data was to really help kind of drive and shape the kind of go-to-market motions. And there's lots of ways that happens. So that was kind of conviction number one. And then, my other conviction, was to share with our co-founders was that, particularly the ANZ market and kind of many markets globally were kind of poorly served by kind of the existing data providers. So we just felt there was a real opportunity to build a B2B data platform that really focused on high quality data that made it really easy to kind of act and kind of drive and refine your kind of sales and marketing engine. So that's what we did. B2B data platform really focused on helping customers prospect to the right people and also find the right time to prospect them and then what's the appropriate way to reach out. So that's that.
Fantastic. And when I first came across Firmable, it did become a bit of a no-brainer, especially for the Australian organizations that we speak to, because I feel like there is a gap in the market in terms of who really does have the best data when it comes to the Australian market. And I think from what we've seen, and I've tested it with Adem, you guys stack up really well there. And in terms of your role there, Paul, you are CEO, but for those listening, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean at this stage of growth? Because you seem very hands-on at this stage as well.
Yeah. Look, to be honest, that's the thing. Obviously, I've been, kind of led much larger organisations, but it's actually one of the things that I get a real buzz out of is, really helping kind of drive the business. So really fortunate to have a great founding team and a co-CEO, Lee Jasper, who was the founder of Aconex. Yeah, together, I guess my role is really just helping the team do what we need to do to grow. And that can really vary. So it can be, at the moment, our kind of finance admin person now, but I'm sending out the invoices, or I'm, doing collections, or I've got a mock demo with one of our new kind of AEs who just been promoted from an SDR tomorrow, or I'm reviewing the monthly reporting, or I'm doing a lot of reach outs, thinking about how we kind of embed ourselves in the ecosystem. So there's no kind of one thing. Sitting in product meetings, you're debating product, you're, kind of getting out talking to people like yourself. So I think it's really super varied. I think you've got to enjoy being hands-on as a CEO, and I think you've also really got to enjoy helping build the culture and the team. What we're really trying to do is build a high-performing team and be somewhere where people love working. And I guess one of the great things about being in the sales and marketing space is we really want to be somewhere where people go, that was a defining part of our career. We worked somewhere which was a world-class sales and marketing organization, and that really taught us a lot. So yeah, so that's kind of what I guess my primary passion is at Firmable is how we really build this kind of world-class go-to-market engine. So that's what I think I'm thinking about.
And something that you mentioned to me in our catch up prior to this conversation, Paul, is when it comes to building that go-to-market engine, you as the CEO, you have to set those goals and the vision for the company as well. And I think you mentioned you might be sitting around that $2 million ARR mark and you want to model towards 10 million. That's a big target. And what's the first thing you do when you actually try and model that kind of growth, Paul?
Yeah, it's a really good question. But probably enough. Tara, Sarah, and I were, kind of sitting around a whiteboard and a spreadsheet, just doing that like a couple of weeks ago. So we've got to 3 million, really quickly. So we've only been in market now for 15 months. So we got really good product market fit, get great traction. So it's okay. Well, so that's kind of almost step one of the journey. So step two of the journey is okay. How do you now start to scale that engine? Because so many startups, I think, they get some early traction and then they really struggle with that scaling aspect. And there's lots and lots of things that, are difficult about that. But the way we really think about it is, okay, and in a sense, it's pretty simple, right? So what does $2 billion look like? Okay, so what's our average contract size? Like again, you kind of go, what's 2 million? What's our average contract size? Okay, then you divide by that. So that means we need that number of customers. Okay, when do we think, so let's model that out. So what we did was we looked at it at 6-month blocks. Okay, so if to get to 10 million, we probably need to acquire, X number of customers. Let's assume we get a little bit of churn because we're kind of a transactional business. Then you lay that down and you go, okay, well, what that implies is we know our win rates are, kind of circa 35%. So if we're winning at 35%, how much pipeline does that mean we need? Okay. And then this is probably the trickier bit is, okay, well then let's think through how we generate that demand. Like how are we going to generate that pipeline? And then, what's the organization that we need to kind of deliver on that? So it sounds kind of simple. And in some ways it is, right? I think it's just maths. Of course, it's then about, making the maths actually stack up. So that's probably the harder bit. But at a really simple level, I think as a revenue leader, you need to have absolute clarity on, okay, if I'm going to get to 10 million, these are the things that I need to deliver on to get there.
It's really interesting that sort of top-down approach to setting these revenue targets. And I think a little bit later in the conversation, we're going to talk about brand and compounding growth and see how that fits into, and if it does fit into a sort of neat sort of spreadsheet for growth, I'll be very interested in exploring that too. But you have also mentioned previously that there are kind of 10 core lines on a spreadsheet in terms of an economic engine model. Can you share a little bit more as to what they are, what the most important ones are?
Yeah, it's a term that, kind of I use a lot is the economic engine, and the economic engine of your business can look different to someone else's business. So you might be a kind of land and then expand. And so you might be, really how do we kind of expand accounts and our net retention and our growth through net retention is really good. Or you might be an enterprise organization which is selling $100,000 deals. So it really does vary on what you're trying to build. But so maybe I'll just kind of talk about how we think about it in the Firmable context. So for us, really starts with, okay, how are we going to drive demand? So how do we get kind of qualified pipeline? And we kind of have 3 key sources. We have our SDR engine, which is kind of outbound. We have our inbound engine, and there's a whole set of stuff that goes into that. Obviously a lot of marketing activity, a lot of ecosystem activation, kind of a lot of brand work, a lot of content, and there's a whole conversation in itself there. And then we have our partner channel. So they're the 3 kind of channels that we look at. I think what's really important is understanding the economics of each channel, and they vary, right? And they've got different kind of strengths and weaknesses. So if you look at an SDR channel, one of the things that, provided your market's big enough, one of the things you can do, and we're just now at this point where we've really proven out that we can consistently deliver qualified pipeline that closes at a 25% rate. So we're now going, okay, we know that if we put an SDR in and we train them appropriately and we get the right person, they're going to be, they're going to be kind of contributing, 100+ K in pipeline every month within their kind of second, third month. So So that's a very kind of linear, in a sense, return. Inbound is less linear, which is both good and bad, right? It means it's that, okay, well, if I want to spend another dollar, I know what I'm going to get out of the SDR channel. The inbound channel is a little bit hard. It's a kind of, but it can be compounding as well. So we do a whole range of activities in our inbound channel, and then we have a partner channel. So then that flows down through to, so you've got your demand. We look very closely at things like trials, conversion from trials. Then you get your pipeline generation, which is qualified opportunities. We have a really consistent view of qualified opportunities, and then how are those qualified opportunities progressing through? So you've got your win rates, and that falls then down through. Okay, well, I've now got this amount of pipe coming through. Let's look at what's the combination of the rep coverage, the type of reps I need to be making sure that we are engaging with those customers effectively, and closing them out. So so that's kind of really how we think about it. So that's the metrics, and I guess what we're constantly looking at is, okay, well, given that kind of pipeline kind of analysis, what is the overall return we're getting? So is our sales and marketing organization getting more efficient or less efficient for the amount of kind of ARR we're adding? So that's what we're really kind of locked in around.
Do you think, Paul, are there parts of that model that people tend to overcomplicate or underthink? Like, where do you sit on that? Do you think it's more or less complicated than what people think it is?
Could be both, I think. I think areas, I don't think people put enough thinking around kind of retention and NRR, because that's an area, because if you are confident that your cohorts will ultimately grow, that means you've got an economic engine that could really accelerate, right? Because when you add a cohort, you get great growth out of that. So particularly early on, I reckon it's hard early on because you haven't had a lot of renewal cycles, but I'm just making sure that you're really dialed in around, okay, what are the cohorts doing, and am I selling to the right cohorts that are ultimately going to have great NRR? So that's one area that I think people often underlook.
And Adam, retention and NRR, I mean, that's something that when you were on the front lines of selling in your heads of sales roles, probably even before you had that CRO role, that's something that became quite important to you that not a lot of salespeople always realize is incredibly important.
Well, without throwing a spanner in the works of any of those metrics, I'll just explain like this. Since obviously predictable revenue in 2008 and Accelerate in 2011, that has been the prestigious model that has been globally adopted, right? In terms of how effective is our SDR motion to get meetings, to get closed opportunities, and what those ratios are in between. But what that doesn't cover, or what that actually misses out in that process, is the tried and true validation of the market. Managers previously, because I'm old enough to remember, and obviously doing it, between 2001 and 2008, basically your job function was to validate the market, what we call cataloging. So whether that becomes Coudounaris cataloging, I'm just joking, but that cataloging was like a market validation piece, and that's how they were measured, right? So how many of those validations went to open opportunity, but after you'd given that to marketing? So within that, who are they with right now? Is that category defined? How long is that term? What would it take to change? What are the problems they have with their current supplier? What do they wish they would have? All of that type stuff. Bringing back like to the 1960s type marketing, right? That was the frontline business development. But a segue from that, which is to answer your question, George, sorry for the long way around, is that piece where you look at the communication plan handover into settlement packs at customer success, and part of that discussion, right? When you go to a live quoting day or a presentation day or a group demo, and you'd run through, like Paul, as I'm sure you're aware, what would it look like to work with us? Is this contract serviceable? Do they have any additional sites? Who are the key contacts? How do they like to be communicated with? All of these things. That now sits nowhere. So in terms of land and expand, what we see with that SDR assembly line model is generally people don't remember, since the book by Aaron Ross, that piece now should sit with the AE, or it should be even validated up front, so you're not wasting time and churning and techs bloat, bums in seats on contracts that are never going to be serviceable at customer success. So I hope that answers your question, George, but yeah, that's a large portion of what I see. And the third piece to that is, without doing that up front, you won't be validating what the market says you should be doing between 12 and 24 months from now within their wish list. So what we used to do is ask, hey, would you need us to be considered at this and this point? Ones that are going to be 3, 6, 9 months for marketing, that goes back, that should get to an open opportunity from market validation. But then you've got your next bucket for validated first party intent that goes to your product team to say, hey, George, we need to be here. Paul, if we do this, we're going to get here. And now we're the big player. So those three components are now missed from that not being taught in the SDR role. So that's my gripe with predictable revenue. I'm sure people have heard from me about 250,000 times. Yeah.
No, that's funny. It's funny. It's interesting when you reflect on some of the lessons we've had. So we spent a lot of time, as we're building our SDR function, we spent a lot of time thinking about who are they calling into and what are they capturing. It's precisely your point. For us, we want, okay, so who are you using? And like we've got the luxury of we're selling the salespeople. So ours is not a particularly hard pitch. It's often one SDR to another SDR. It's, hey, hey, I'm Firmable. I don't know if you've heard of us. We're a deeply localized, blah, blah, blah. Just curious, what are you guys using? And they go, oh, well, we use blah. What's it like? Well, okay, and how are you finding it? So we kind of do that, which very much is and I like the language that you guys use around that. It's okay, well, let's kind of catalog and then go, okay, hey, we know you're not up for a year in 6 months. That's cool. Who's going to be involved in that? If I give you a call and touch base in 3 months' time. So I think one of the things so yes, you focus on your economics of your SDR channel, but for us, it's kind of the tip of the spear for driving market awareness, I think, as well. Like it's got a much broader, and people get, the one mistake, I think, to answer a question you asked, a couple of questions ago, I think people can get too hung up on attribution. Like, this is an SDR deal, this is an inbound marketing deal. Like, often, you don't really know. Right? And you need multiple channels working together. Like, it's actually the overall outcome that matters, not the individual channels. So, which is where the art in it all is, I think, and where the math doesn't always hold up. So yes, so an equally long response to your comment out. But I think you're strong there.
Just to follow up on that, Paul, because it sounds like you've got your SDR function operating that way anyway, where they are cataloging, which is fantastic. But kind of objection that Adam and I come across quite regularly when it comes to cataloging is our SDRs are they're measured on number of meetings booked. And if you're incentivized on that alone, then if you speak to someone straight away and they're not interested in that demo, you're better off just ending that call and going to the next person to try and catch them in market, aren't you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe we, our SDR team is still relatively small in the grand scheme of things. And I think one of the things that we just keep saying to them is, you guys are out there. You're the tip of the spear. Like, you guys are learning. Like, you need to be helping us to learn about what's going on in the market. So I think we're really fortunate that our SDRs kind of take that upon themselves a little bit. So kind of culturally, in a way, like, I think you're right. Like, kind of logically, in a way, you possibly should just move on quickly. But I think also you go, well, actually, if I have a good conversation with someone, then in 3 months' time, they've given me permission to ring back, right? So then, yes, I might not get a meeting this month, but gee, in 3 months' time, that meeting's a slam dunk because, and I think that's how our team thinks about it.
To take that even further, what we do is we build that into a process that has templates and tools for those 3 categories up front. And then we literally take that over to the marketing team or the customer success team so that we're aligned as an organizational unit, what I used to call end-to-end service delivery from the front. Because what you're going to learn from that is you couldn't get a better insight from the market.
Yeah, one of the interesting kind of, and there's a long conversation about sales and marketing tech, but I think the rise of kind of call recording software and AI, the ability to run a model over that to kind of go and pull out those key things. So gone are the days when, you actually need to enter them in you actually can do that at a scalable way now. Because I think we probably used to miss, there's a lot of rich information in those kind of calls that is just missed because it's not necessarily entered in a systematic way.
Yeah, I agree. But what I'll say as a slight rebuttal is when we speak to enterprise and they do run that, they still find that sits with the business development person even after they leave. If it's not templated and tooled inside of the system back to the channel that needs the answer, whether that being marketing or product. It goes no further, and then it goes into the abyss. And if, as we know, if they go to a competitor and they've got a non-compete or whatever that might look like, gardening leave, you'll never get that information ever again. So George was pretty much a wizard with taking everything that one of my mentors taught me from back in the day, that we amalgamated these processes into being templates and physical tools, which now makes it simpler to do that, but so you also don't lose it. Because then it's sitting with the department that needs the answers instead of sitting with the person that obtained the information gathering.
It sounds like, Paul, that the SDR function that you've got, I mean, we'll go into this more. You say, I think 70% or so is technically inbound, but you've got 30% going outbound. But actually the role that the SDRs are performing isn't just that outbound make contact role. It sounds like they're capturing so much more information for you and possibly even feeding back what's like the product development roadmap. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. Like, to certainly, again, particularly early on, I think as you grow, like particularly really early on, like you just learn so much. I think as you get further developed, you've got a lot of other sources of feedback as well. So it's still important, but it's not as critical as potentially it was early on. But yeah, 100%.
And was there a point, you've obviously had a long and very successful career, was there a point where you saw other SDR functions that maybe didn't perform their role the same way that you're getting them to do it now?
Yeah, to be honest, a couple of my previous companies, we never quite got the SDR function to work. To be honest, like it's not, and it does vary depending on the type of. So it's not easy, right? Like, I'm not saying that SDR is the only thing you should do. Like, I actually think, it's a really important part of your strategy. But if you can do stuff that is compounding, like that's even more important. Right? So stuff that kind of compounds and builds over time, like it may not have, immediate short-term paybacks, but it could take you from a $10 million business to a $50 million business. So that mix of what am I going to do that is predictable, as well as what can I do that is really going to embed us and drive kind of compounding growth. So for us, one of the things we think a lot about is, and I kind of call it ecosystem activation. I don't know, there's probably a better term for it than that, but particularly in our world, what we see is, I was at 70% of the stuff's career map, and you say, well, and that is literally people who are searching for room. They're either searching for Firmable or they're coming to a website, and you go, well, how did they find our base? They use an SDR call, maybe, but probably more often than not, it was they asked. They listened to a podcast and they heard you guys talking about it, or they were chatting to their HubSpot implementer who said, "Hey, well, you guys should check out Firmable because they're local and their support's awesome," or they were chatting to a colleague who's like, "Who do you use?" So I think in this era where it's getting harder and harder to buy, and that whole kind of traditional, kind of highly numbered driven outbound, I think works less and less. It's actually about, how do I want to buy and I'm a bit confused. I'm going to talk to someone who I trust. So I think that kind of referenceability, if you can get your ecosystem engaged and talking about you, that's super powerful.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Cool. So Chris Walker used to talk about that around 2021, that was going to be the next thing. I've got a question. I know that's not part of our questions for today, but I'll just, if you don't mind. Do you see, like, with the advancement of all of the AI, but a lot of this stuff, because we're talking about more traditional motions here, is the next chapter going to be simply going back to what we did before because people will be able to see through some of the AI? And I know George has got a very similar view. Do you see that unsaturated channels or non-usage channels right now, so physical catch-ups, physical roundtables, crazy deal boxes in the mail will come back, all of the stuff that we did prior will possibly be an extension of the business development role or market validation piece?
Yeah, I could not be more in violent agreement with that. I think so. That's when we talk about ecosystem activation. It is getting out to, like I talk about micro events, like get out to a meetup. If you're a small sales rep, get to a meetup. If you don't have 3 great conversations, I'll be really, really surprised. Yeah. It just starts to build on itself. So I think we're going back to an era where brand is actually very important too.
Mhm.
Like, so if we, it's going to be brand, it's going to be awareness, it's going to be actually, I think people, one of the things that we've realized too is people want to do business with people who are active in their ecosystem. And that really works for us that we enter the market because like we're part of the ecosystem. We're contributing to it. We're part of the ecosystem. We don't have all the answers. So we're not going to get it right all the time, but we care. And I think that really resonates. So I think you're really right. Like we get, we were like when we started Firmable, we were like, oh great, we've got all this information. Let's build this amazing outbound email. Almost zero results. So it wasn't like, I think there was some value in a kind of a brand awareness, but these are the, people were like, hey, we're better off spending time through, kind of content, social media, micro events, just getting out and about. So,
I suppose the barrier to entry has just dropped so rapidly to reach people and in what many people, I guess, will call spam cannons, but even doing it in a more tailored way, Paul. I've been reaching out to create a benchmark report for the B2B Playbook to people who follow us. And I think I sent 260 video DMs, like each one a minute long, addressing the person, inviting them to be a part of it. It took me quite a while to do each one. And the response was really strong, but I had at least a couple come back and accuse me of it being AI driven. And it just made me think, oh my God, first of all, I say my response to that, Paul, is if it was AI, I would have reduced the size of my forehead. And
how reckon you could get an AI agent to replicate my country accent? So.
And like it to me, while it wasn't AI now, people are probably going to have the ability to do that. You can probably do it now already anyway.
Yeah.
But if I'm doing that, means all of a sudden that way of communicating with people, the trust is brought down there. So then do we just go back to, again, like a hyper localized approach of one-to-one, one-to-few events, doing those micro events, being active in the community? Because if people don't even trust a video message, like where does that leave us?
Yeah, but it's probably that you kind of go, if you go, well, in one sense the barriers are dropping, but in another sense the barriers are increasing, right? So once you have brand and awareness and trust, you are really well positioned to then grow, I think. So,
yeah, I suppose that's true. Yeah. And I guess the stronger your brand is, the higher the chances the person will respond to you regardless.
Yeah, I think too, one of the things we talk about is you also want a concentration within an ecosystem. So you'd rather sell to, like you'd rather have, if you were selling into multi-markets, like if assuming your ecosystems are local, and sometimes they're not, right? But assuming an ecosystem is geographic, it's actually better to have one industry. You'd rather have 10 customers in one industry and one geo than have 10 customers in 10 geos and 10 industries, right? Because your chance of getting, kind of network effects and compounding kind of growth and awareness and referenceability. So that's another thing we think about a little bit too.
So with this emphasis on brand, how does the founder-led brand play into that for you, Paul?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think I'm very good at it, to be honest. If I'm allowed to cut it a bit back. What I'll get out, it's like Australians aren't very good at it either, really. So, like, well, you guys probably, but you guys are much better than I am. I think there's just a natural, kind of our kind of culture at Firmable, you like to be pretty humble, right? Like we like to let, the product and the business do the talking, but actually people want to hear perspectives from, kind of founders, right? And actually the perspective that we have on what's happening overseas, the best practice, well, we actually have some interesting things to say, like, because we spend our life obsessing about this. So it's actually one of the things that we're talking a little bit about internally is how we can be more effective at it, how we can, just lean into it a little more. Like some things that, like, I find it much more natural to come and chat to you guys than to put out a LinkedIn post every week, right? So that's kind of, so I think you've got to kind of figure out what's the things that you personally can do and how do you build that. So yeah, but it's really important, and it's one of the ways, particularly in the US, that is really effective.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it is a cultural thing. I think we when we caught up in preparation for this conversation, Paul, I think I mentioned that I was so nervous to post on LinkedIn before I started 4 years ago. I deleted every single family member and every single friend that I was connected with in my network. And to this day, now I just feel, oh, look, people are only ever, they're barely paying attention. Yeah, there's probably a few who are snickering behind your back, but it is important to our business. It doesn't mean that I like it. I don't love it. I've got to say I don't love it, but it's really important for us moving forward. Adam, how do you feel about it personally, posting your personal brand out there as someone who has been featured in LinkedIn Lunatics, and you've made the Reddit thread, the subreddit is LinkedIn Lunatics. Yeah, well, like, how do you feel personally about a founder brand?
Well, thank you for throwing me under the bus. For those who are not aware, anyway, that's rather here or there. But I think you've just got to think of it as documenting, not telling, and then take them on the journey of what you're documenting as you're discovering it. But it wasn't really much different from being hardcore on the phone or having those, as we discussed earlier this morning, George, when we used to do physical drop-ins and you try to get past the gatekeeper to get into the boardroom from one 30-second block. So how it's not really any different from doing that, or the ability to do that, than pressing record and telling or documenting some piece of your journey.
Yeah, the way I think about it a little bit, I think if you could be people, you know, I like following people online who tell me interesting things. So, you know, that whole kind of, even harking back to the whole challenge days, like I want to hear from people who I learned something from, who tell me something different, who, you know, because I'm curious. Like, I think you really get, like, you need to be curious and go to market, otherwise you can't succeed, and the world's changing really quickly. And I'm curious, and I spend a lot of my time listening to, you know, people, a lot of people in the US, and, you know, you guys, and there's lots of people out there who you listen to, and you go, well, actually, you know, kind of learning and synthesizing a bit of this that, you know, could be relevant. I think that's kind of be, it's not going to be relevant for everyone. And it's not like you're going to say something that's, you know, transformative, but I think if you're curious and open to trying to synthesize some of your reflections, you know, kind of an authentic way, like I think you've got to kind of find your authentic voice as well. But yeah, so yeah, that's, you should ask me this question in 12 months' time, George, and hopefully I'll be a more effective example of it.
Paul's going to win Favicon Sales Influencer Australia.
Funny enough, though, when you do think about ecosystem activation, you can actually be pretty structured about it. So, because in our world, you know, we're lucky that there's sales influencers like being out there talking about things, right? So that's kind of what they're trying to do, and they like trying to be able to talk about something new, something different, which is kind of what we're doing as well. So you can kind of go, well, actually, how can something about cataloging? That's kind of when we really used to example of that. When we entered the New Zealand market, literally, I kind of went through and identified what I thought were the top 100 kind of influencers, and I catalogued them off. I literally reached out to them all, and I had to, you know, and you know, probably 8 out of 10 of them said, sure, happy to jump on for a chat. And we chatted about the market, what was going on. I asked for advice. And that was almost one of the most powerful things we kind of did when we started to think about that. And it took, you know, and it gave us a lot of credibility. I think it kind of established ourselves as part of the ecosystem. It was, it was a really interesting kind of learning in how you can kind of do that.
Yeah.
Paul, a question I have is, when you're facing really short-term pressure, which is often put on us by those who invest in the company and the boards that are running them, how do you justify these longer-term plays like brand or community to investors on the board? Because they probably don't fit in that 10-line spreadsheet quite so neatly, do they?
No, it's really hard. It's not easy. Like, so it's hard and not easy. And I think anyone who's kind of saying otherwise is probably, I think it's my kind of experience. It's almost just got to be a bit of a personal project, if that makes sense. So it's, yes, radio, you know, yes, these are the things we got to live in by quarter, but you've actually got to have, you know, a little bit of, I'm going to spend a little bit of discretionary time trying to do the things that I know will build value over time. And really it just, and it helps if you've got it. And probably one of the big advantages that we've had actually is we've been really fortunate to be able to, you know, like a lot of founders are still deeply involved in selling every deal. Like that's, you know, we're not, that's not Firmable. And in fact, probably Chester, if he's ever listens, will be laughing at this, going, saying we were much more effective when you stopped selling. But no, like I think we're lucky in that we can have the day-to-day drive and focus on the business, you know, starting to get its own momentum, which allows kind of us a little bit, that allows me particularly to, maybe spend a little bit more time on things that are a little bit kind of over the horizon sometimes. And so, so I think if you can find out how to find time, that's kind of the critical thing. And the key way to find time is to build a team that can, kind of execute. Right? So.
I suppose it does need a very real investment, though, and it often needs to come earlier, at least in my experience, than most things. Just for a bit of extra context, Paul, I've worked as an external resource, running a lot of paid media, more performance marketing function for quite a long time, often with VC-backed companies. And we'd constantly run into this challenge where the demand for MQLs would just rise month on month in a market that is limited in size. And when you look at the 95-5 rule, you just have to be in business, and not everyone's looking to buy right away. You're going to hit a point where you just can't keep putting $1 into the machine and getting $1.50 back. It doesn't scale forever. But if you leave it too late, then the expectations that are put on you from the investors versus what you can achieve just don't match up, and ends up being a really stressful, horrible situation for everyone involved.
Yeah, and coming back to kind of where we started, like that's, in a sense, that's understanding your engine, right? Because if to your point, like you particularly paid, like, it looks really good where it scales initially, but it starts to kind of, the curve starts to kind of flatten out, right? And that's like, you've got to understand that point. You go, well, actually, realistically, there's only X number of people searching every month. So, even if we get all of those, we're still not going to deliver what you need. So we're going to have to do some stuff that's a bit different, right? And so we are not going to win just by doing that. And that's, one of the big lessons that's multi-channel. Like, you got to be doing lots of different things, because one channel will carry you one half, and then you'll have to do something, it'll need to be supplemented and reinforced, I think.
I know part of my mission is to change that upstream measurement from that MQL. If, like, just toy with me here, Paul, but if we change that back to market validations, it's because the MQL forces other actions. So say, for example, the meetings booked measure also then forces marketing to be no intent lead gen, and in that endless cycle, which also then causes performance to keep pressing the button when they know it's not going to work. So then they come to work every day and they're like, oh God, I'm dreading this. Paul's going to tell me to press the button again, and I know it's not going to work. But it's like this vicious cycle, because that's been accepted across the board as the measurement, but they're not looking at the commercial failures that it connects to. Whereas if we just literally wind back to 2008 and said, hang on, if we just measured market validations to open opportunities, no one would actually have this problem, and we'd have more of a runway in terms of spiking up that first party intent, changing that measure. People have more security and love in their job each day, and the people in the seats would actually be more commercially viable. I just think that's probably...
Any thoughts on that? Or if not, we can move on.
No, I agree. Like, it's one of the lessons is always ask why. Like, so why is that working? Like, so why? Like, okay, why? And to your point, they can start to go, actually, so then, and I'm a big fan of kind of first principles thinking. So, and it's your point, this focus on a metric can be really harmful, right? Because, the metric might not be working. So then it's okay, well, let's just step back a little bit, and let's all get together, because we're all going to be affected on this, and let's try and figure out what's going on. So, I agree,
Awesome. Yeah. It makes sense when you can look at it from all these angles, right? But unfortunately, as we know, LinkedIn world and the greater global economy don't look at it that way, because they've been like fugazied to look at it from another perspective. But it's our mission to get that awareness out there. Hopefully, collectively, we can change that.
Yeah, just to build on what Adam was saying, is my experience, Paul, has been that when those measurements are in place, as you said, marketing is constantly reduced to the lead gen hamster wheel. And we don't get to use, I suppose, our skills, which is like good one-to-few, one-to-many communication to build awareness, trust, memory in the market, because we're so focused on that lead gen target. But it's really hard to communicate that upwards. And if you had any advice for any of the marketers listening, as someone who is sat in that CFO seat, really what it is that they're looking for, and how can we get through to these CFOs?
Yeah, probably I would say if you would, I have been a CFO, so maybe I'm allowed to say this, but if your CFO is a party run kind of marketing spend, you've probably got a bigger issue. So no, it's, and this is I think one of the things that having stayed in the CFO chair and CEO chair, you've got to, this is not 100% maths. There's a bit of art to this, right? And there's also a bit of balance. So you've got to do you don't want to do too many initiatives, but you just can't do one, right? Like you see, you've got to have a bit of a balance. I think it's educating people that, yes, and I'm an analyst at heart, right? So I love nothing better than attribution. But actually, the big lesson I've learned in my journey is attribution is not the be all and end all. Yes, it's important and it tells you stuff, but actually, it's how's the whole system working? Like, what's our market? Who are the customers? So we talk about high ICP customers. Who are the customers who we want to secure, who we think are going to be, our customers in 5-10 years' time that are going to be growing, and we're going to be growing with them? How do we be in their world? How do we be in their ecosystem? How do we know exactly who they are and where they're at? So I think it's a bit of education upwards around, actually, this is a system. This is not just one thing. And yes, it's nice to think I can push for a leader, but actually the world's not that simple. So, which is probably an answer that most CEOs and CFOs don't like. So,
so even doing some education then, Paul, around things like the 95/5 rule, the fact that obviously not everyone is in market ready to buy right now. People are with the current vendor. And I'm sure the CFO, if they think about it, they would realize that. So would it be helpful recommunicating that and possibly having some of your own data to show this applies to us too?
The way we figure out is, okay, here's our core of our market, here's our high ICP. They're going to have a couple of characteristics. Some are going to be using a system, some are not going to be using a system. Okay, what's going to be those that are using a system? What's going to be? So you start to kind of go, okay, those that are in market, how do we have how do they know about us? So all of that kind of process. And I think if you can kind of lay out that a little bit, you kind of go, well, we need to keep investing here to make sure that when people are coming into a decision-making framework, they know about us. That's kind of been the learning for us, I guess.
And Paul, as we look to that growth from that 2 to 10 million mark, are there a few really big bets that you're making on what's going to help you get there, or is it a bunch of small ones? How do you view that?
Yeah, I think it's probably a handful of medium-sized ones, if that kind of makes sense. I don't think it's one big bet, but you also need to have a bit of a conviction around what is working for you. So we're doubling down, for instance, into kind of ecosystem activation, trying to do more content, more events, more industry engagement. So that's a kind of a bet, a rock, if you like. At the same time, we're looking to kind of scale out our SDR team. At the same time, we're also looking to invest in kind of partnerships, which kind of really dovetails into kind of the ecosystem play. So we're kind of putting bets across a number of those different areas. Like we're also really trying to level out our game in a digital sense, in a content sense. We think there's lots of stuff we can kind of do there. So there's no one thing. I think you've got to kind of you've got to be constantly kind of chipping away, and essentially, when you look across your organisation, you go, we've done really well in that area, but actually now we've got to circle back and put some more focus on our content, or we now have to circle put some, actually, our partnership executions. It's not really very scalable. It's got a lot of spreadsheets. We actually need to put a bit of effort into making that more scalable. So I think you've got a handful of bets that you work out how you can do well, I guess.
And are there any particular segments that will be a really core focus for you going forward, or at this stage is it you've identified a few that have worked really well and you'll continue to go deep into those?
Yeah, we are interesting in the sense that we're very horizontal. So our target market is anyone selling B2B, right? And there's about 50,000 of those customers in Australia, right? So that's a big thing, guys. What we find actually is we're kind of doing two things. And this is, we have a motion which is switching out kind of existing incumbents. So we're highly successful at switching out and Zoom Info, Lucia, kind of Apollo, etc. So there's the core of the kind of traditional sales intelligence market where we're doing switch outs. But then actually, because we're deeply in the local market, we're actually kind of expanding the market as well. So we're also getting in contact with a huge number of other organizations that might not have previously had a vendor. So we're both kind of expanding the market and kind of doing switch outs. And they're different motions, they're different size customers. So that's been one of our learnings, if you like, is how do you kind of think and manage those two kind of segments? Because they want different things from the product. So that's something that we're, kind of thinking all about.
And I suppose it also determines, like, if you're running advertising, where you put your spend, what the messaging is as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. So because those, at one level, they're in a sense they've got different problems, right? So,
yeah, absolutely. No, it's really interesting, Paul. I feel like it's such a no-brainer, Firmable, for so many organizations. And maybe that's from an outsider looking in, but
you're not going to get any argument with Ray George. So.
You've got our PO box for the check, right?
Like how can you be effective in market without deeply understanding your market? Like it's just like, and we're in the era now where there's so much data that's available, like, and your opportunity to do so, not just find the right customers, but actually start to engage with them in a timely way based on data. Like there's just so many opportunities out there. So I'll get off my soapbox.
No, it's great because to me it just makes a lot of sense. Like it solves a clear problem that people have. It's quite easy to buy as well.
Yep.
Presumably, I think it's probably a little cheaper than the incumbents as well.
Yep.
And the quality is higher. And I'm not doing this to pitch Firmable to everyone. I'm doing it to, I think, maybe also give a little bit more context to the conversation, because I feel like a lot of businesses out there aren't dealing with something that has such a strong product market fit. Where does this sit for you, Paul, in terms of other businesses that you've run or been a part of in terms of finding that product market fit?
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting actually is, so back in the ATX days, so construction tech, that was, started 20 years ago, in a sense was a different kind of sale, because you were saying, hey, George, I know you're building this big complex project. You have problems with this. How are you dealing with that? Oh, there's a better way. You can use technology to do something different. So that was an education sell in a sense, which is a very different type of process. With Firmable, it's the ability to say, hey, George, you're obviously, outbounding it, blah, what are you using? How are you finding it? And you're like, oh, I've just got a real challenge with blah. And, so the ability that we have at Firmable, like the problem statement resonates, like it's a really easy and natural conversation. There's very little education. People get exactly what we do, which is really powerful. And then I think if you're at that point, then it's quite a natural conversation to go, hey, well, let's have a chat about how we can help you. And our kind of style is to have a conversation with people. So, let's chat through what they're doing. Let's work through whether they, and I'll have nothing more than chatting to customers and, tell me about your ICP. Have you thinking about it? Have you thought about it this way? Like, have you thought, it's a really easy and natural conversation. So that's been one of the learnings for Firmable, I think, is it's a very easy thing to talk to people about. And because it's so horizontal, you can pretty much go to any event anywhere, and there's 20 possible customers. So that's good as well.
And that's the beauty of operating in, I guess, an established category. You don't really have to do the education. They've got an existing vendor. Yep. Adam, that's where you did a lot of your cataloging work, right? Was when there was already an established category, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that makes it a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah. Worth the third. Yeah.
A little bit trickier to create the category, George.
Yes. I'll prove that.
It is, right? Yeah, because educating people is expensive because it takes time and it takes experimentation, and you've got to do it really consistently. It's much easier, I think, to go into an existing category, that one that's really well educated and one which has a clear pain point that you can solve. And for me, that's really what Firmable does, Paul.
Yeah, no, exactly. You've got to be different and better. So that's the only patch of go you put in existing category, of course.
And is there anything else that you wanted to share in terms of how you're planning to get Firmable from 2 to sort of 10 million that we haven't already covered? We spoke about like events and appearing in the community and investing more in content. Is there anything else that you wanted to add there?
No, so I think we're now feeling really, yes, there's lots we need to do, but I think we're feeling really good about, where we are in the, kind of the ANZ landscape now. And that's a really, really big market in itself. Like it's, data is a big market. It's now, I think we've kind of got two things we really want to do. One is, I think there's a huge opportunity in what we kind of call signals and events. So if you think about one of the great opportunities I think we have with sales organizations now is using data to trigger events or plays. Hey, we know we've got these 500 influencers in our accounts. Let's track when they move accounts. Or we know we've got these, whatever it is. There's lots of signals and triggers you can use. So I think what we want to do is really help our customers do that easily, because I think that's a huge opportunity that very, very few organizations do well. So that's kind of one mission we're on. And there's a lot of hype around signals and blah, 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 blah. But I think, how do you make it really simple to use? It's a really simple use case to make it very easy to adopt. So that's kind of one really big thing kind of we're focusing on. And then the other thing we're thinking through is, and starting to plan for, is how we start to expand adding to Southeast Asia. So we're looking to be launching up there earlier in the year. We've got a heap of customers already who are saying, hey, we'd love to, we work with you around ANZ, we'd love to work with you more broadly across APAC. So that's something that we're at. And so how do we then, in markets we're less familiar with, how do we activate an ecosystem? How do we build a brand? How do we build this referral network? So, it's doing it in your home market is one thing, but now we're going to prove we can do it in another market.
I want to double click on that, Paul, because you shared with me prior to this that you've taken companies globally before, and with that, there's always going to be some lessons learned. What are there any that you'd like to share, and maybe what you can take away from that? And I don't want to say do better for Firmable, but learn from it and do it differently for Firmable.
Yeah, look, so APX was in 40 countries, message media. We had a big push into the US. Like it's a whole podcast in itself, right? But it's, international expansion is hard. It's really hard. I think, Australian companies are better than most. It's considered they are a little bit like American companies in some ways aren't very good at, because they've got such a big home market that they don't really have to. Whereas I think Australian companies kind of feel they're naturally a bit international early on, which I think is real positive. I think lots of bits of advice. I think it doesn't, the things that resonate in your home market don't necessarily resonate in another market. So you could take for granted that your value proposition resonates, or you could take for granted that the industry structure is the same, or you could take for granted that, the set of tools that you're integrating with, or the technology landscape. Look, there are really subtle things that by vertical change in geo to geo. And, we saw that particularly in construction and also in message reading as well. So I think you've got to be really thoughtful about how do I, kind of validate that, test that, so just be really open to market feedback and bring a little bit rigorous around how you start to, how do you start to catalog? What's actually going on there? Like who are these customers? Are they potential customers? I think, and it may be you did a bit of a different framework for that. So lots and lots of, I think, learnings in that. It all comes out of feedback loops though. Make sure you're curious, getting feedback, and as a founder / CEO / leader, make sure you're kind of living that feedback, on the ground, if that makes sense, or just staying really close to it. I don't know, there's a bit of a stream of consciousness, stuff that maybe for a longer discussion at another time.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially around like making sure that you bridge that cultural gap when you expand into a new market. And we have someone who's part of our community at the B2B Playbook. She joined our program, and her origins are in Southeast Asia. And that's something she talks about quite a lot, is she sees so many brands try and expand there, and they haven't realized that their message, that the value proposition is not, or just how they go to market is not translating into that region culturally. And it's quite interesting. I'd be very happy to introduce you to her. She's lovely as well.
It feels like someone that I should be talking to. We could learn a lot from, so keep the connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, One is a bit of a kind of quick question. What do you think is the biggest myth about growing a B2B software company in Australia is right now?
That's a really good question. What do I think the biggest myth is? I think I'll give one and go from Adam on this. As much as I am a huge advocate of really understanding how your engine works and how you scale it, like I think you can be a little bit too obsessed on the numbers and the metrics, I think. So this is not just, we're not in the world where I think, okay, well, if I just, if I move from sending 1,000 emails to 10,000 emails, is something going to make it happen? So I think I think that's a bit of a myth, and there's a bit of clickbait out there on LinkedIn, I think, to your point, Adam. So you get a bit of that, but it's not exact science and it's hard, but it's people are rewarding and it can be done. And there's a lot of great examples of companies in Australia that have done really well.
Yeah. I would just add, if I may, as a extra piece, and I know that we talked about that with Frank Grief's post on TikTok, George, don't be obsessed with looking for American money for the equity piece, because then you're going to be held over a barrel by metrics that come from a different country that don't apply to this market. And that's what a lot of the Australian founders that don't understand those predictable revenue models are now not going to be applicable for here. So then you've taken the money and now you're answering to someone that has no idea how your market works. So that would be my area of caution. Having seen that 3 times since I came back to Australia, and I was just like, whoa, slow down here.
Paul, I might give you a chance to respond on that, actually, as someone who has a founder's fund in Glitch Capital.
Yeah, I think it's funny. One of the things that we hear all the time is founders want people around them who've kind of been on the journey a little bit and have made the mistakes and have a bit of life experience and who have dealt with difficult investors, and kind of can actually provide a bit of practical, not that you can solve every problem, but there's a few things you've seen before, and it's funny when you talk to founders, there's quite a narrow set of things that they want to chat to you about, and they're pretty common, right? So we're getting a lot of traction with our founders fund.
Awesome. Paul, before we wrap things up, is there anything else that you really wanted to discuss or add to the conversation? That doesn't have to be, but I just like to check with every guest.
No, all good. It's been really good. So listen, I love chatting go-to-market, and you've reinforced my challenge to be a better founder CEO communicator, George. So you're gonna have to the touch base and pick up. You're gonna go, Paul. How are you going on that?
Just please don't delete your network like I did first, Paul.
No, we'll see it. We'll see the videos every day.
Yeah, that's right. Regular every day. Right.
Paul, as always with every guest on the B2B Playbook, we're going to cut these up into nice little social snippets.
Yep.
You'll have content for a month, Paul, for you to post on LinkedIn.
You can find something useful in there. But really enjoyed chatting, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your time.